Good morning to all across Canada and the United States joining us today, as well as across the beautiful African continent this afternoon. I'm Gareth Bloor, President of the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business, and it is a pleasure to be with you again, this time with another incredible panel showcasing broad-based development and trade across the continent in action, with the wonderful work and support of Canadians who have taken up the opportunity to support fabulous ventures led on the continent by Africans and by friends of the continent from around the world. Today, I am delighted to hand over in a moment for the official welcome to our Vice President, Susan Namulindwa, based in Ottawa. We'll then be followed by David Luke, coordinator of the Africa Trade Policy Center and a key figure in the biggest free market deal since the WTO, the African Free Trade Agreement. Matt Davis will then be with us. He is CEO of Renew Strategies. We then have Sindi Mzamo, President of the Circle of Global Business Women, followed by Asiimwe, Chief Technical Officer at TradeMark East Africa, an organization that's been hailed for its incredible work in facilitating trade in the east of the continent. We'll then go into a Q&A, and Her Excellency Sibongiseni Dlamini-Mntambo, High Commissioner of South Africa and representing the country head of the African Union as chair this year, will be leading us in concluding remarks. This event, of course, comes on the heels of a particular Women's Day celebration in South Africa, where on the 8th of August, the vital role of women in the fight for liberation is recognized. And I certainly enjoyed many conversations with a number of you on Sunday as we commemorated that. I want to also acknowledge Global Affairs Canada in delivering this webinar and in the support they've given to so many associations, including many you'll hear from today. And then I want to recognize the participation of the non-governmental Africa Trade Desk in Ottawa, led by our Vice President, Susan Namulindwa, as well as members of the Commonwealth Business Network, the Business Women Network in Kenya, chaired by Nana Wanjao. Thank you for joining us. And no doubt, last but certainly not least, members of the Circle of Global Business Women. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to hand over for the official welcome to Susan Namulindwa, Vice President of the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business.
Thank you, Gareth. I am so delighted to welcome our partners and friends from around the world to this conversation. It is an important conversation, and I am so delighted with the panel that we have, but with the participation from all around the world in enabling broad-based Canada-Africa trade and investment today. It has taken decades of sustained campaigns and messaging for Africa to get the image it has today. For many people around the world, when they hear the word Africa, the images that come to their minds are of hungry, naked children, guns and armored tanks signifying war and chaos or corruption. Or maybe if they have seen any documentaries, it could be elephants, lions and tigers, oh my. This is sad because Africa is much more than this. So for us to change that, it is going to take the same sustained amount of effort, if not more, to change to the one we are talking about today of equal trading partners and solid investments with incredibly good and excellent returns. Now, I'm not sure if I can use incredibly and excellent in the same sentence, but I just did. It is going to require us to have fair, open, transparent negotiations and relationships built with partners such as Canada and others around the table. It is going to take changing the default mindset from aid and dependency to the one to investment and trade. It is going to require the inclusion of women, specifically African women, in all these rooms, all these levels and tables where the important conversations are taking place. It is going to require us to consider the impact of our activities on the environment, locally and internationally. Last but not least, it's going to require us to include the African youth, both on the continent and outside of the continent. So today, how do we do this? You say, it is going to require one statement, one conversation, like the one we are having today, one picture, one open door of opportunity to one person at a time. And it is going to require our collective efforts. As I think about that, I cannot think of a better panel that have the knowledge, the experience, the credibility, and the passion to talk about this in a broader sense than the panel we have today. So it gives me great, great pleasure to welcome the panel on behalf of all of us, on behalf of the Chamber, on behalf of Canada, on behalf of Africa, on behalf of everybody that is registered and is online. Please welcome me. Help me to welcome our panel, starting with David Luke. Back to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Vice President. And if I may just add, I was handed a list of the many hundreds who've joined, and I do want to add, which I didn't at the start, so my apologies, Your Excellencies and public representatives, as well as trade commissioners of the Government of Canada, among many others with us right now. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, David Luke, for your constant engagement, not only on the continent, but coming regularly to Africa and delivering and living that message that Ms. Namulindwa so clearly articulated on behalf of the Chamber. And the special relationship with the Africa Trade Policy Center, by way of introduction, goes to the fact that there was incredible work done in the creation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the single biggest agreement since the advent of the World Trade Organization. And Canada was proud to provide some support by way of its development assistance to the incredible work that your organization does. So what a wonderful partnership between the continent and Canada. And without further ado, over to you, David Luke.
Thank you very much, Gareth, and thank you also to Susan, to the Chamber for inviting the Center to be part of this, this conversation. Delighted, of course, to join Alan, Matt, and Cindy, as well as Her Excellency, the High Commissioner, on this panel. The theme that I was given is enabling markets during COVID-19. And what I want to share with you is what we're doing at the Africa Trade Policy Center, ATPC, as regards research, advocacy, and technical assistance to enable markets, in effect. Let me also say that we don't see these three elements as discrete, as isolated. Our research fits into advocacy and fits into technical assistance, and the way we approach and design research, we already build all these elements into the work that we do. In other words, we're supporting policy change. And I think policy change speaks to many of the issues that Susan raised in her introduction. So we've been leading analysis on COVID-19 and its impact and responses on the continent. You'll see from this graph, this graphic, that I'm showing that massively Africa has not been as hard hit by the pandemic, but nonetheless, there is a cause for worry, especially since we are seeing an upward trend across the continent in the daily reports of new cases. South Africa in particular has been a cause for concern, but as you see from the graphic, there seems now to be an improvement in the situation in South Africa, no doubt by the very tough measures that have been taken, and not only in South Africa, but across the continent, where governments have really demonstrated incredible leadership in how they have approached this pandemic and the seriousness with which they have approached the pandemic. So among the work that we've been doing is also to highlight the costs of the lockdowns, and also how countries can emerge from lockdown in a safe way. And the picture that you would see on the right is actually the cover, and there'll be 2 or 3 of these in this presentation. We'll be highlighting what we have done and suggesting that if anyone is interested, they could follow up and visit our website and be able to look at these publications and the ideas we are sharing themselves. The website address I will share at the end of the presentation. So in looking at lockdowns, one of the issues we came up with was firstly to estimate the cost to African countries of the lockdown, which we put at about 2.5% of GDP every month on average, which is a huge cost. We undertook a survey of African businesses, and we found that on average they're operating at about 43% capacity. Africa is a continent which has a large proportion of its population as well as slum dwellers. They were hit especially hard. With slum dwellers, for example, reporting that they're missing meals. People who live basically on a hand-to-mouth basis. The lockdown had this kind of knock-on effect. We also looked at the exit strategies, taking some examples from around the world as to how countries have come out of the lockdown, and basically advocating that combination of these 3 strategies that I highlight on this slide can be used by on the continent to, as far as possible, to support what is now a new normal, that we're living with the disease insofar as we don't yet have an effective therapy or vaccine for the disease. So these 3 options, or these 3 strategies of testing and contact tracing, of gradual segmented opening, and of active learning through data collection, basically is what some combination of the 3 is what governments are following as they open up the economies. We have also been looking at the implications of the pandemic for facilitating cross-border trade, and I'm sure you will hear quite a lot from Alan on this. Just to highlight a few points, about 38 African countries closed land borders, 17 African countries also closed maritime borders. All these countries targeted the reducing movement of people, while also allowing some exemptions for movement of emergency and essential freight supplies. At the level of the RECs, at the borders, RECs introduced guidelines, regulations for safe cross-border trade, for example, mandating testing, sanitizing trucks, limiting truck crew members, and so on. These regulations, of course, all aimed at minimizing infections, fatalities, but still cross-border trade has been constrained. From preliminary data, we estimate that intra-African exports declined by about 17%. Based on this work, which I highlight on the screen, we are now looking with the African Union to see if there could be a protocol that could encompass the best practices from the RECs on how they have been managing border crossings during the pandemic. As we talk about enabling markets, we must not forget informal cross-border traders, an important demographic and which we pay a lot of attention to in our work, in our research. And indeed, this report, which is also highlighted on your screen, the cover of that report, it will be coming out very shortly. So it's with a lot of information, a wealth of information on informal cross-border trade, especially with the case study of the Lagos-Abidjan corridor. And here we are highlighting some short-term recommendations that government should reflect informal cross-border traders in their COVID-19 responses, and then of course in the longer term to look at strategies for formalization. I'm trying to go very quickly. There's really not enough time to elaborate on all this material, but really to point you to where you can find more information. I mentioned earlier that we undertook a survey of African businesses, and we found through this survey that covered virtually all of the continent that African businesses have been hit very hard by the pandemic. And when I say African businesses, I mean businesses operating in Africa, not just African owned, but businesses operating in Africa were in this sample. And again, I can only just highlight that businesses did report that they're experiencing, for example, delays in shipments, logistic issues, and of course problems with border closures and so on. But amidst all of this, and there's always an opportunity in a crisis, we noted that businesses are also saying that they are pivoting to online solutions, online selling, in terms of also online business to business transactions and so on. So what we are finding, again, you could get more details from the report. What we are finding is that businesses, insofar as they're able to, are pivoting towards digital solutions. I think when we look back on this period, you're going to see a marked shift in the use of digital technologies during this crisis. We're also looking at how countries can come back from the pandemic much more strongly, given the recession and so on. And here, what we are highlighting is also the opportunities for adopting green growth strategies. Indeed, what we are seeing, because we do need to pay attention to what's happening in the rest of the world, is that we're already seeing that the European Union has rolled out a Green Deal strategy. And just south of your border, we take note that one of the presidential candidates has also rolled out a Green New Deal strategy. And our thinking is that you could well see a new transatlantic alliance that has green growth, green issues, fighting climate change in a meaningful way as part of the Western Alliance. So I don't think that's far-fetched. And recognizing that investments, future foreign direct investment, and also trade would need to be greener. This is one of the areas of our advocacy going forward. We're suggesting that as African countries recover from this pandemic and look to the future, certainly green growth and green transition should be top of the agenda, along, of course, with digitalization, which I've already highlighted as one of the lessons we are seeing from this pandemic. Of course, we continue to support the AFCFTA, and thanks to Gareth for acknowledging the work that the Center has done in support of this major initiative on the continent. And three things very quickly. Firstly, again, because of this strong response that we found from business and in regard to digitalization, we're suggesting that the decision that has already been taken at the level of the African Union to include e-commerce in the negotiations should be fast-tracked and possibly brought forward so that we can get a quick, a new protocol very quickly on this very important area, because there are many loose ends, policies that are uncoordinated, several aspects which require African countries to take a much more harmonized approach. from regulatory interoperability to minimum standards, data-related issues, data ownership issues, etc. So we're advocating for e-commerce to be fast-tracked in the AFCFTA. Also, we're advocating for health and education services, which are among the 12 WTO service sectors in the General Agreement on Trade in Services. We're advocating for health and education also to be fast-tracked in the AFCFTA negotiations, because we very clearly, I think we all recognize now that we were really, as a continent, exposed by this pandemic, that there are many trade-related aspects of health care that can benefit from liberalization. Education as well, the new ways of delivering education, but also education services that are directly related to healthcare. You cannot expand your capacity in healthcare if you don't also expand your capacity in healthcare education. Then, of course, we're also suggesting that for pharmaceutical products and healthcare products, there is scope to ensure that the tariff liberalization process under the AFCFTA takes this into account, front loads the liberalization of these life-saving products, create a continental market for these life-saving products, giving investors within the continent, from outside the continent, the incentive to benefit from scale economies by producing on the continent. So we think that there's an opening here, also learning from this crisis and from the way that Africans were exposed in this crisis. Susan highlighted the importance of gender in her opening remarks, and of course, at the center, this is something that we pay attention to, not because we're funded by Canada, by GSC, but because it's the right thing to do. And again, our research supports this in all sorts of ways as to how creating greater opportunities for women actually does benefit all of society. So I don't need to get into that. But I just want to highlight that in terms of the implementation of the AFCFTA, we're advocating for gender mainstreaming. We have developed tools that can be used in that regard. We are piloting methodologies on developing national capacities for data and statistics on gender, because you do need that as well. I can see Garrett getting a bit anxious for the time, and I'm going to quickly wrap up. And here I just again want to highlight the kind of work that we're doing to support national implementation and of the AFCFTA in the countries. This just gives you a status update. We're in 19 countries. We're at the inception stage, looking at what their strategies could focus on within a template that we've developed. Also, 12 countries are actually at the drafting stage. 8 countries have finished reports and are validated and so on. I'll just end with this, and I'm just here to highlight, again, going to themes that Susan touched on briefly in her opening remarks, that the foreign aid landscape in the 2020s going forward is going to be, I think, very different from what we have known, because of the fact that many of the donor countries have unleashed such massive financial power to fight this pandemic that they're broke. Literally broke. And in the case of Canada, as we say, that there's projected to be a 343 billion Canadian dollars deficit for the upcoming fiscal year, and so on. So just very quickly, what we're suggesting is that we recognize that in the 2020s, there'll be less on foreign aid. I think this is also an opportunity, of course, to prioritize humanitarian concerns, the SDGs, the human development issues, etc., but to pivot to the points that Susan made in her opening, to pivot towards business, trade, investment, because that is what is sustainable, and that is what is going to drive growth. That is what is going to help African countries service their debts, which is another story. We don't have time to get into the debt question in this segment, but that is what will be sustainable. So I know I have taken a bit of time, but let me stop here. As you can see, I'm just getting warmed up. It's a subject that interests me very much. But let me also just point you to the website address, www.uneca.org. You find a wealth of information and materials they're working on that we're using for advocacy, for our technical assistance work and so on. Once again, thank you so very much for being part of this conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Luke. And one thing just came to mind when we designed this series of 12 webinars we're currently doing in partnership with Global Affairs. We thought we should be able to cover a fair amount of what Canada-Africa partnerships are out there, which are out there. But, from one partner to another, as we go on to renew strategies, it's very clear that there's a lot happening and that the potential is not only there, but is being acted upon. And no doubt what we're picking up, and certainly Susan and others in Ottawa can speak to this, is the growing commitment, despite any challenges that may exist in each of our countries, that growing commitment toward partnership is certainly going to see us through and into these incredible opportunities, especially with a market of over 1 billion people that you've been leading on through the creation of the free trade agreement. So thank you very much. Mr. Matt Davis is joining us. He's usually based in Ethiopia, but at the moment he is in rural northern Michigan, just across the border from us here in Ontario, Canada. And he's very graciously left his rural setting without internet, made his way to a small town, and is joining us now. Matt, thank you so much for your commitment to the continent and leading with investing, especially with your focus on investing through a gender lens and into SMEs. It's really, as they say, putting one's money where one's mouth is, and another partnership with Global Affairs. Thank you for joining us to share some more information.
Of course, Gareth. Thank you for having me. And I'm trying to share my desktop. I'm not sure I'm able to share the slides. I think, David, there we go. Okay. But let me get started. Hopefully we can move fairly quickly. Have you been able to give me the screen sharing settings?
That's correct. It's got you able to hit share screen, and your screen should show.
Okay. Well, I'll see if it will do that. Unfortunately, it might not. So, yeah, let me go ahead and just start sharing. So, first off, I think Susan opened with an extremely powerful comment. I'll just go from voice, where. When most of the world thinks about Africa, unfortunately, the images that come to mind are exactly as she pointed out: poverty, lack of development, corruption, etc. However, when you actually get on the ground and see the activity that is happening on the continent, like I did over a decade ago, I was absolutely astonished. And it dawned on me, as a consultant with the US government at the time, that there is a large majority of people, likely like me, in developed countries that continue to have the wrong impression about the rich opportunities that exist on the ground in Africa. So I set out to try to go through the fun activity of changing that brand and perception, one investment at a time. As many of you know, East Africa is one of the fastest growing regions of the world. And by 2050, people project that Africa will have the largest and youngest workforce, even greater than India and China as a bloc. This has attracted considerable interest from a group of investors, usually the first group of investors that come into a frontier region, called private equity or equity type investors. And honing in on Ethiopia just briefly, because that's the country where we're actually partnered with the Canadian government right now, and I'll talk a bit about that in a moment. But that is the 5th fastest growing economy in the world. It's the 12th largest population in the world. It's the 13th fastest industrializing country. and it has the 13th largest labor force in the world. So the macroeconomic indicators from the perspective of an investor, if you were to walk into a room on Wall Street or up in Toronto and you'd share those statistics, but you wouldn't share the country, people would probably put down their phones and look up at the slide, because that's pretty compelling. Those are very interesting figures. If you were to also compare and think about two pictures of the demographic profile, if you were to look at Canada and put Ethiopia's demographic profile and the pictures of those two next to each other, what you'd see in Canada is an average age of 41-year-old. In Ethiopia, it's 19.9 years old. It's a very young population, and it's a huge bulge at the bottom of that age pyramid. So you've got, in most developed countries, especially Europe, the United States, even China, you've got an aging bulge of population. But most of Africa has very young workforce. Now that's exciting from some perspectives, especially for manufacturing and very labor-intensive industries. But if you're in the government of many of these countries, it's also concerning. Because if you don't have a private sector that's going to absorb that workforce, you're going to start seeing things that are happening like they've been happening in Ethiopia, which is civil unrest. You've got young people becoming more educated, looking at the job opportunities. And right now there's about an 8 million deficit jobs per year on the continent that are not being filled by the private sector, which is a problem as well as an opportunity. And as an investor, we are always looking for those opportunities. We're always asking ourselves, well, where can we invest? Now, as a private equity investor, mostly we're looking for big deals, 50 million and above type investments. But when you actually get on the ground in these countries, what you quickly realize is that the private sector is nowhere near mature enough to absorb 300, 400 ticket sizes that big per country. That they just don't have the number of companies that can absorb those types of investments. What you have are a large amount of micro companies and then a good amount of what's called small and mid-sized enterprises. Now, SMEs are phenomenal. They're beautiful. They're these wonderful businesses, often family owned. They're just starting to get beyond the 3, 4, 5 employee stage. They maybe have a few $100,000 in revenue, and they're primed for growth. And globally, these are the segments of the private sector that create the most jobs, provide the most jobs around the world. Yet, in Africa, what we see is that they're caught in this awkward thing called the missing middle. And this is a gap in the capital market that exists. Many of you know this. Most of the people on this phone are well aware of this challenge. It's a gap right between about that $10,000 to $5 million investment range, where the companies are too small for banks, they're too risky for banks, but there's nobody to provide them capital. And that is a market inefficiency. That's a developmental and economic developmental problem. Now, if you can think about it, if we could mobilize the amount of capital that we're putting into Facebooks and Googles and Apples and all these companies, and put those across a portfolio of SMEs, the impact, both economically, but also developmentally, by the jobs that they would create would be phenomenal. Yet, we've got a bunch of Westerners like myself sitting around thinking that Africa is, as Susan pointed out, giraffes and safaris and poverty. So we went to work years ago, and we opened up an office in Ethiopia. And Renew is, our mission is to invest in hundreds of SMEs around the world and grow them into market leaders, and in the process create millions of jobs and truly shift the brand and the relationship that the West has with the continent away from giving to investing. Where my grandchildren, I would like to look and say to me, Granddaddy, did we really used to give to Africa? Because we want Africa to have such a brand at that point of a true investment destination. When I was a child, we would talk about China that way. Right now, China's knocking on our front door as the next superpower. And that is possible within the next 20, 30 years. We can see in Africa that has that brand and has that same reputation as a growth market. So we founded Renew to fill this missing middle gap. And in 2016, we entered a partnership with Global Affairs Canada, which was a blended finance model. It was completely innovative at its time. Absolutely phenomenal group at Global Affairs that saw that, hey, we need to find a way to leverage, to increase leverage. For every $1 of grant of taxpayers' money, can we bring in $7, $8 of private capital into the private sector? And we went to work on this model that has now helped build the largest SME investment firm in Ethiopia. We've created thousands of jobs. We've brought in over 50 million Canadian dollars of capital into the private sector. We've invested across a number of SMEs. And what we realized in the process of this partnership was that the missing middle is not just a capital problem, it's also a management problem. We both have to bring in capital, and then around that capital, wrap around a lot of technical assistance, specifically not just about how to turn a piece of cotton into a garment, but also how to teach Ethiopians how to run a successful and thriving garment business. And that is what we are doing right now in partnership with Global Affairs. If you could see my slides, you see a fairly elaborate picture of the process that we take it through. But Renew has organized the Impact Angel Network, which in partnership with GAC is the largest angel network dedicated to investing in SMEs on the continent of Africa. We have about 160 families, both in the United States where Renew started, and now families up in Canada and Europe that are investing in companies. In country, we have something called the Exchange, which is really a management institute where we're building CEOs and CFOs to help them, as I was describing, run those companies after they've received an investment from our investors. And then we have a gender smart holding company, which is a $50 million holding company that we designed with GAC as part of this project, that is attracting gender smart capital to back not only women-led companies, but men-founded companies that we are helping make gender smart. Because if we're just gonna go after women-led companies, there's not enough pipeline. We also have to right-size and smart-size companies that are already existing and help them treat women better, help put women in positions of leadership, help get women board members into those companies. And that is what our holding company does. So in summary, it's been a wonderful program that we've launched with GAC in Ethiopia. On the trade and investment side, it's very focused on investments. We're trying to build up a world-class suite of companies that are setting the pace and the tone of what good business should look like, from governance, financial management, all the way down to trade and regional trade. As David was just pointing out, is a huge opportunity. And I think the regional trade agreement that is being ratified now across many countries is really the next frontier. And David is absolutely right. Aid is changing. Our old model of just giving money away, Africa doesn't want that. They want the dignity and respect that comes from investing. And we would really like to see more programs like that we've launched with GAC in Ethiopia across many different countries. So in summary, I just want to thank Gareth and the team for organizing this. It was a pleasure to share what we're doing. Hat tip to Global Affairs. They've done a phenomenal job. They've been an amazing partner with us, very innovative when it comes to blended finance. And also for everybody else that's passionate about this work, I think the future of Africa is investment and trade. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to you, Gareth.
Thank you very much, Matt, and for your exceptional work and for sharing the message. And I know you're very humble, but you've advised governments around the world and senior leaders, and it's wonderful to hear your experience in the way Canada has been approaching this matter along the lines of the way Susan described, based on dignity and trade and broad-based empowerment. Thank you for staying with us, and we've certainly got a lot of questions coming in, incredibly positive comments as well on our members' WhatsApp line. Our next speaker, the penultimate speaker on the panel before we get into the discussion, is President Sindi Mzamo, President of the Circle of Global Businesswomen. This is a WhatsApp group that I was added to and has been one of the most active in terms of sharing news, people in the press, great bits of information, and incredible openness to Canada. So thank you for inviting us into your world, Madam President, and your thousands of members who are just so passionate and doing every day the sorts of things that are being described when it comes to the trade and the numbers and the potential. So over to you for your inputs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Gareth Blow and the Vice President, my dear sister, who just opened from the Canada-Africa Chamber of Commerce. Indeed, we're humbled to actually partner with the Canada-Africa Chamber of Commerce, it's the Circle of Global Business Women. You know, I like what the previous speaker has just said, Mr. Matt. He says that Africa needs dignity and respect on investments. The same thing, women need dignity and investment in dignity and respect on investment. Also, I'd like to acknowledge my dearest sister, who is the ambassador for South Africa in Canada. We are really humbled, Your Excellency, our sister, and thank you very much for actually giving us an opportunity. And to all the panelists, my brothers and sisters, thank you very much for giving me this platform to share with you. The Circle of Global Business Women is a platform of African women that are dedicated to the African, development and empowerment of women, and actually taking the African women to the global forums and global markets. This is exactly what we're doing today, President Gareth Blow. This is who we are as the Circle of Global Business Women. And we're really humbled as well to be part and parcel of this network of the Canada-Africa Chamber of Commerce to actually take the African women into the platforms. Now, what is important for us as the Circle of Global Business Women? We're so excited because the president is also the chair of the African Union. And also at the same time, in South Africa, it's the Women's Month. So I'd like to say Happy Women's Month to all women globally. Happy Women's Month to all women in Canada. We're really humbled as well to participate in this special month in South Africa to actually, empower women globally and be the best of the best. Now, President, I think the best platform that I attended was with SG Wamgelemene. And SG Wamgelemene spoke about powerful things in terms of the implementation of the Africa Free Trade Agreement. And I think that's what really brings us today as the Circle of Global Business Women, to say what is it that we can do as women in the continent in terms of the Africa Free Trade Agreement when it comes to the implementation. Because our role is very important, but not only established business women. I mean, we've got powerful, I always see these women, the cross-border women, that always hike and sell their powerful artifacts from country to country. And these are the women that must be in the forefront in terms of actually the implementation of the Africa Free Trade Agreement. But also at the same time, what is important for us as the Circle of Global Business Women is the issue of making sure that our trade policies are harmonized so that we'll be able to actually travel from one country to the other to actually do business, because that's the most important thing. Yes, we can talk about the free trade agreement, but there's systems that must be enabled for us to be able to actually thrive as we do business amongst each other as business women in the continent. And also, for me, which is powerful and effective is the Circle of Global Business Women. In Article 3, when you look at Article 3 for the agreement of the Free Trade Agreement, it says that it talks about gender equality as one of the general objectives. So if gender equality is key, obviously women in Africa are key to actually be in the forefront of actually driving the women and economic empowerment of women in Africa. So in terms of actually looking at these things, President, we're really humbled to actually be part and parcel of the Canada-Africa Free Trade Agreement. But I think my brother Luke addressed some of the issues in his speech when he looked at the issue of training, capacity building of women to make sure that women's companies are powerful and they're able to actually trade amongst each other, because we can talk about enabling the environment, but if women are not ready in the continent, we won't be able to actually do business with each other. So as the Circle of Global Global Businesswomen, we have taken this initiative as one of the most powerful initiatives to say, let us come up with capacity building programs with our chairpersons in all the African countries where we have chairpersons, as we're rolling out to actually appoint chairpersons in the continent, so that we'll be able to actually drive the empowerment of women in Africa. As we speak right now, we have a chairperson in Lesotho, we have a chairperson in Zimbabwe, we have a chairperson in Botswana, we have a chairperson in Zambia. As we go on, we are appointing chairpersons across the continent, and also in the globe. We have a chairperson in the US, our dearest sister Njeri Tubey, who is working 24 hours to make sure that we connect with women globally, because that's the role of the sake of global business women. We're not competing with any women formation, but what we're saying is, let us collaborate. Let us take women to the next level in the global fraternity in terms of leadership. And also Matt spoke about the appointment of women in key decision-making positions, serving in boards, but it's not just appointing them, is to actually make sure that they thrive, and we create an enabling environment for women globally to actually thrive and make it a point that they are the best of the best, because a woman is an economy. Now, the last part that I would like to really talk about is our relationship with Afrexim Bank. We are actually working with Zanamwe, who is the director of Intertrade in the continent. Before the COVID-19, we had already started working on a program with the Kigali Trade Fair in Rwanda, where we're even looking at a pavilion where we'll get women in the continent, so that that pavilion will actually be demonstrating women from South Africa, women from Botswana, so that we showcase, because I believe that we've got one of the best products as women in Africa, especially if you look here in South Africa. You look at nice crafts that women are doing in KZN. We trade with those crafts. We take them into global markets. Gareth, in Canada, surely you can buy those products. We open access to markets, because that's a role that we must do as the circle of global business women, to open access, to open access to markets for those women that are in rural areas, because they are doing great things. They've got the idea. So what we need to do is we need to finish that product. With those words, I'm really excited. I'm sure you can see it to be this platform, President. And I'd like to say thank you very much. We are ready as the sector of global business women to take women, in the marketplace in Africa and globally. But what is important is it's one vision, one Africa. Let's make sure that as women, when we rise and take our rightful positions in the marketplace, we are united and we can work together and we can move mountains. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you so much for your passion and for your role as civil society in a truly Pan-African way. I think you've thrown down the gauntlet and set the standard, and we are just privileged, thanks to the intervention of High Commissioner Dlamini-Mntambo, to work with you and to realize all of these objectives. And I know we'd need a few hours to just go through some of the projects you've already done, but the message and the values you've outlined are absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for doing so. And another final speaker, as we come toward the end of the panel program, is somebody who is very well acclaimed and respected, and I've picked that up particularly in academia. Asiimwe, who's the Chief Technical Officer at TradeMark East Africa, is joining us. And yesterday, a professor at Ryerson University here in Toronto wrote to me and said, I can't believe you got her as a speaker. That's incredible. We're sending this to our whole class to join the program. So your reputation precedes you, Dr. Asiimwe. Thank you for joining us, and thank you too for your partnership with Canada.
Thank you so much, Gareth. I don't know if they are mistaking me for a doctor, but I'm glad to hear those kind words. I'm glad to be here and glad to reconnect with David Luke, who I've worked with on a number of fronts at the Afrexim Bank and also within TradeMark, and to make new acquaintances, all of you here. So great to be here. So thank you so much. So I'll just speak briefly about TradeMark and our relationship with GAC and the work we are doing in the region to really facilitate trade and reduce the cost of doing business. So TradeMark, just as a way of background, is a not-for-profit organization. We work in 12 countries in East and Southern Africa, so all the way from Ethiopia down to Malawi, where we are setting up, and Mozambique. And within the East African region, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan. And our main aim is really to unblock trade costs, to unblock a lot of blockages along the trade corridors within the continent so to move goods and services more easily. And so in the last 10 years, we've worked quite a lot on infrastructure interventions, on trade reforms, on trade policy reforms, and trade environment, and also working with the private sector and civil society to enhance access to both exports and imports within the region. And I think we did contribute a lot to reducing the trade costs, because one of the biggest issues is that trade costs are a big percentage of the total costs of any product. So what the region has been suffering, if you're looking at buying, for instance, the shirt you're wearing within this region, it will cost you 10 times more than what you're buying it, say, in China or Hong Kong or any other region, mainly because of the transport costs as a big factor. So we set out to reduce the costs, and we did succeed, I think, in reducing those costs. We also worked a lot on women and trade. And Canada has been such a big supporter of us right from the beginning in the first phase between 2010 to 2018, supporting us on the trade policy reforms and around integrated border management. So one-stop borders, you're familiar with the border between Canada and the US, being able to ease movement of goods through those borders, reducing the red tape, reducing corruption, reducing bureaucracy, and just improving the physical infrastructure. That alone has seen the times to move goods from one part to another going down by days and hours. And that alone, each day that is saved, that's a lot of savings. So Canada has supported us a lot in the integrated border management, where officials are able to work together, which was something unseen in these African communities, because it's a sovereign state having its own borders. For you to actually trade with another border, another country, means your goods moving through, and that could really jeopardize the whole trade regime. Canada has also worked with us on women, supporting women, informal cross-border traders who fly between the borders. Anyone who has gone to any of our African borders will see that they are filled with thousands and millions of women and communities that just make a living out of trading basics, from vegetables, foods, eggs, to some intermediate goods as well. And so with Canadian support, we've been able to support these women to move from informal routes to actually using simplified trade regimes that have been put in place to allow anyone trading, say, below $2,000 to access the other countries' trade. And we have been doing, I think, some work with UNECA around these simplified trade regimes, just trying to see how we can support more countries in the region to adopt regimes that allow not just big business, but small business to thrive. And so it's been quite an interesting journey. But in the last few months, we've had COVID. And so COVID has sort of scuppered everything we had put down. We've seen trade costs double. We've seen costs going up to like 30% of what they were before. We've seen times going up. It's taken maybe weeks now to cross a border. David Luke spoke about borders in 38 economies being closed. Whereas before trade, you would pass 30 minutes, your goods are going through. Now it's taking days, if not weeks, to get your containers. And those are hotspots for COVID as well. We've seen intra-regional trade plummet. Within the East African region, we are estimating even more than 50% of the trade has plummeted, because whilst border trade is open for cargo transport and shipment of transit goods, you find that one-to-one trade from, say, Uganda to Kenya has been curtailed with the closure of borders. Borders are not yet open as I speak, except for cargo, movement of cargo. So the informal traders or the small scale traders, and Matt was very passionate about this, most of our trade in Africa, in East Africa, is really founded on the backs of small traders. And by small, I mean, when you come here and you're trying to do a $50 million investment, remember that most of the traders, my mother included, all of us included, Susan, I know you're smiling, all the traders and businesses we have here, really, if you find a business of 1 to 5 million, that is big. That is characterized as big. I remember at Afrexim Bank, we had to try and characterize, when you talk about SMEs, what are you talking about? You can't have an SME of $5 million in East Africa or in Eastern African region. That is more of a bigger business. And so you find that because of COVID, many of them are really struggling. Now we see our region has not come up with many economic stimulus packages. So the onus is left on business to struggle and strive to sort of survive. And so we see trade as the way out of this. And it takes me back to dignified trade. We see trade as a vehicle that is going to enable us to actually enable the region to both recover, but also to grow. And to facilitate trade, we must ensure that the basic parameters are in place. What's happening? We are seeing that COVID, transportation has been a vector for COVID. Airline transportation, long distance transportation, truck drivers, moving goods across regions are also carrying COVID along with them. And so this has been a big issue in the policies around the region in driving the lockdowns and the knee-jerk reactions. And so we as TradeMark have come up with a safe trade intervention that we see running for the long term. And this safe trade facility, we've put together around $23 million with our partners, including Canada. And we are looking at one, keeping borders open, so by providing PPE and other equipment, and also by providing solutions, ICT solutions like a truck driver app that allows you to track cargo drivers all across the corridor. Say, for instance, from Kenya to Uganda, all the way to DRC or South Sudan. Those drivers travel thousands of kilometers, and if you're able to track them, you can assure and increase the trust levels within the communities. We're also trying to look at keeping supply chains safe. We've seen with COVID, supply chains have been disrupted. I've talked of vegetables, fresh foods, which our region trades in. Most of these have been curtailed and disrupted. Demand is severely compressed, and you don't see how we are going to be able to recover from this unless our governments, one, open up, but open up safely. And so we are looking at supporting the region. We have been supporting the region with protocols around safe trade, but also with adopting the WTO and WCO guidelines and tariffs, especially on zero tariffs for key medicines, critical medicines, ventilators, thermoguns, which at times had a tax component, trying to work with them on liberalizing those sectors, and also putting in place the appropriate policies to harmonize opening of borders and movement of goods across borders. And then the third critical area that we are working on is keeping exports. Most of our regions, as you know, are heavily import dependent. We import everything, consumables. So we have huge trade imbalances. So what we are trying to do for the region is to support borders to remain, import exports to remain, to flow. Most of our regions are based on coffee, tea, cotton, perishables, commodities. And so what we have done is to try and see how we can automate some of the processes. I'll just give you an example of the tea. Our tea from this region, from Uganda, from Kenya, from Rwanda, is the tea that actually feeds half of the world, I think. And it finds its way to Pakistan and Sri Lanka and the rest. But this process has been very manual. And so what we've done in the last few months is support the automation of these processes so that the online tea auctions are actually automated. So digital trade, as David has said, is very critical. I also want to turn to the aspect of our women traders. As I've said, most of the business in our region is really founded on small business that sort of aggregates into the bigger pyramid. We are trying to see how to support most of the traders to come together as a collective. All the loan rangers are struggling, and we are going to see a lot of liquidations in the next few months because, as I said, there are hardly any economic stimulus packages. There are hardly any financial packages. The fiscal systems are very heavily burdened with poor payments and all that. And so what we are trying to do is see how we can support women to work together in collectives, the power of the collective, to see how they can actually aggregate. Let me give you an example. Women trading in eggs, women trading in horticulture. If they're able to aggregate and with support with the standards aspects and others, they're able to feed into the bigger supply chains and make their way into the exports. Canada imports a lot of vegetables and textiles from our region, which are really from the small traders. If they're not able to get into the value chain, then they lose out. So we're doing a lot of work around aggregation. We're doing a lot of work, and Matt talked about this, the invisibility of women. Women are invisible, and COVID has made them more invisible in the system because they're sort of shut out. We are online, many of the traders are unable to go online. And so we are trying to put them and connect them to digital trading systems, but also to know who they are. Who are these small traders we always talk about in Africa, in East Africa? Who are these women? Who are the men who are trading? Where are they? Where are they located? And so trying to know where they are so that we're able to create virtual marketplaces where they can actually trade is one of the big aspects of our work. And Canada is our biggest supporter in this work around inclusion but also around ensuring that as we support the region to grow, it's growing back better. You've seen our region pivot a lot, and I'll close quickly, pivot a lot to manufacture PPE. So many of the industries, we were struggling on how to get into the fourth industrial revolution, but with COVID, we've seen so many companies pivot into manufacture of PPE, manufacture of equipment, and critical medical supplies. And so we are saying, how do we support the region to attain the best standards there, international standards? How do we support the region to access new markets? How do we, especially with cargo transport being very expensive right now? So we are working on a lot of advocacy initiatives, standards initiatives to support the region. I think for me, my call, and it really goes back to what David Lucas said, what Matt has said, we need trade that is equal. We want to work with the Canadians on addressing the issues that are actually impacting the traders, the small and middle business people. If I give you an example of some sectors like fish or horticulture, the absence of cold chain facilities, you're not going to spend $50 million investing in this, but absence of cold chain facilities around the region is severely impacting our horticulture and fish trade. And yet these would be critical avenues for growth for our region. So we want to see investment that is actually not just in energy and big manufacture and all, which are good as well, but investment in areas that are impacting the small business as well. And I think you can get more Canadians interested, Canadian businesses interested in investing if they know that they can actually find ripe ground for that. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Asiimwe. Incredible work, and it would be remiss of me at the conclusion of the panel not to thank the Director General of Global Affairs for Africa, who is with us, Susan Stephan, as well as her predecessor, Paula Caldwell. I know for everyone on this call, these are key leaders who've done incredible work, and we thank you for always giving the floor, and certainly Susan Stephan for your ongoing work in leading all of these initiatives. We're now going to go to a round of Q&A, and what I wanted to do is take the questions, if I may, in the order of our panelists. And if we don't get to any questions, we'll certainly have a provision at the end of a way to get in touch to do some follow-up and direct engagements one-on-one. David Luke, the first question goes to you from the High Commissioner of Rwanda, His Excellency Prosper Higiro. His Excellency asks, how does the African COVID-19 pandemic response impact the perception global investors have of the continent? Do you see any innovative strategies that can be implemented to improve the negative perception, which Matt Davis, in fact, alluded to earlier in his presentation?
Yeah.
David, you're just on mute. If I think you hit the mute button.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. I'm now on mute. I think this is a very important question that the High Commissioner of Rwanda has raised. I think there have been issues around governance in Africa, in across the board. But in this pandemic, I think that what we have seen is the seriousness, and I touched on this in the presentation, the seriousness with which African governments approached the management of what potentially could have been a disaster. Certainly we are not yet out of the pandemic, and I don't want to leave the impression that it's going to be plain sailing from now on. But I think that we have seen that measures were taken quickly, early, tough measures. Borders were closed. I think several of the presentations, Alan, and Matt have touched on some of these aspects as well. So overall, I think one should give a lot of credit to the authorities on the continent for dealing with this quite well. And I think that has sent a signal to investors on this particular aspect. Another dimension which I somewhat alluded to, but there was no time to get into it, is of course the resources to fight the pandemic. I think African governments have been very clear with partners around the world that they are constrained with the resources that they have to fight the pandemic. Some initiatives were taken at the level of the G20, as you know. Unfortunately, private creditors, private holders of African debt have not participated in these initiatives. And African governments themselves have been careful to say that what they're looking for in terms of getting the financial resources is not debt cancellation, but debt relief. And the growth model that most African countries are following is one in which they want to develop and enhance exports in order to earn foreign exchange and earn revenues that can be used to pay for debt. Debt is not a bad thing. We all know that. Companies borrow and everybody borrows to use these resources productively. So that's the kind of model that countries like Ethiopia have been following, for example, and appreciated Matt's overview of this. And that is what has been leading to the growth. So I think African governments have come out of this quite well. You cannot say that for all governments around the world. Of course, there have been, some pockets here and there of where issues have arisen. But overall, I think we have seen a maturity and a level of governance that has been purposeful in addressing the crisis.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. The next question goes to you, Matt, and apologies again that we couldn't get your presentation, but we'll certainly circulate all the materials that you have to everyone who's joined us this morning and this afternoon. Matt, this one is a bit more of a personal question around perspective. For all of us on the panel and many joining us across Africa, we're born on the continent, but you're coming from a North America background and you're seeing the clear opportunity. And the question is, what allowed you to see the opportunity and act on it, with a view to how do the rest of us understand how to approach conveying the scale of the opportunity to high-level people in finance and individuals like yourself who may not yet have Africa experience?
Yeah, great question. I think honestly it was, well, when I first went to the continent, I didn't have too much of an agenda. I had a small agenda, but I was mostly just going to see what was happening on the ground in Uganda. And I think that is such a powerful tool that we should all be using more often, as much as we can. Every time we bring over a major philanthropist, a major donor, to come visit Ethiopia or Uganda, we've been starting to do more trips into Uganda too, and we say, hey, before you come here, leave the charity and aid glasses at home. There's a lot of people with those glasses on. Don't worry, that's well covered right now. But what I want you to do is put on your opportunity glasses, and I want you to come over here with a fresh perspective. And I want you to think like this was your country, 60, 70, 80 years ago. And tell me what you see. Tell me what you experience as we drive around. And I tell you, it's the most amazing thing. They're looking at buildings. It's a whole new energy that they get. And we try to bring that energy and that perspective in everything that we're doing, because that's a part of that brand rebranding that we have to do, because it is the next and it's the final frontier. It's really the great land of opportunity. But the problem is that so much of us, the dialogue that penetrates and is really always at the front of the agenda is the P of poverty, but we really need to change that perspective to opportunity. And I think that's what's going to start getting more of those dollars coming in the form of investing to the continent.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Matt. Sindi, the next question is to you. A lot of speakers have tackled the issue of the constraints that governments face. And do you see among the women that you're working with in South Africa, but also across the continent, a greater resilience than has been expected in the absence of government support? And any thoughts around that, the way women in particular in business have been overcoming these challenges? And your mic is still on if you could unmute, that would be perfect. You're back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think it's a very powerful question in working with women in the continent. There is a resilience because what we say is the sector of global business women. We are powerful in our own right. We need to work as partners and also ask government to assist. But we cannot wait for our governments to act on our behalf. We must go and lead the way and assist our governments to turn it around. That's a mentality that we are coming up with as the sector of global business women. We are a solutions provider. We are assisting governments to turn around the challenges that we're facing as women in the continent. Because we have identified the challenges, we know the challenges where they are. But what we're saying is we don't want to sit and fold our arms and blame the government. But what we're saying is we're going to our governments and introducing ourselves like here in South Africa and say, this is the sector of global business women. We are ready to work with women in South Africa and also in Africa. One thing that is a blessing to us as well as the sector of global business women, our own president, before being a president of the sector of global business women, I'm a South African. Now I'm talking about my president, who is President Cyril Ramaphosa, who is the chairman of the AU. So we are privileged as well on that because we've got the platforms. We speak to the Minister of Women in South Africa. We present our programs. We have a very strong relationship with the Ministry of Women in South Africa, and also looking at the advisor of the president in AU, who is also our dearest sister. We have consultation almost every week to update her on what we are doing in the continent, and also how do we make sure that we fast track all the programs, because now when it comes to a continental level, we are dealing with Africa, and hence now we're escalating it to the chief advisor of the president at the AU. So we are actually seeing progress at the same time. It's also because we need to rally behind our governments and make sure that the programs that we're talking about in terms of the implementation of the free trade agreement are actually going to be achieved. But we must stand up and take our rightful positions as women to actually make sure that we assist our governments to achieve that.
Thank you very much. Nick, thanks for that answer. And I'll send a few other questions. For the questions, again, that we don't get to, we will be making that connection as a chamber to the incredible panel we have with us today. Alan Asiimwe, the next question goes to you, and it's around leapfrogging in the implementation of trade agreements. So the question basically presumes the fact that Africa has forged ahead very speedily with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Your organization's been working on regional trade deals. What benefits does the continent have that other countries have not had in speeding up implementation using things like technology at ports, for customs, for clearing? Any thoughts on that particular aspect of trade deal implementation?
Thank you so much, Gareth. And that's a powerful one, because we've been talking about Africa leapfrogging, but we knew right from the start we didn't even have the basic infrastructure, the backbone. But many countries have actually upgraded the backbone for infrastructure. And so what we're trying to do to work around with the region is just put in place the right policy frameworks, whilst they also try to continue improving their infrastructure with partners like Google and the rest who have come to invest quite heavily in the region, because you do need that infrastructure for e-commerce. But what we are now looking at is, because the host has sort of left the stable, trying to work, for instance, with the East African community on a regulatory environment for digital trade, and also trying to come up with innovations. For instance, we've been piloting innovations on what we're calling a trade logistics intervention for flower exports. Kenya is the biggest exporter, one of the biggest exporters of flowers to Europe. So we are working around that aspect in terms of block technology. Once you're exporting your flowers, you ensure that all the paperwork has already gotten to Rotterdam. By the time your flowers get to Rotterdam, they don't have to wait for the paperwork to follow, and then you're cleared instantly. But then the other aspect we are also looking at is connectivity. We are seeing how we can connect the different country systems. So for instance, Uganda, Kenya, all have a customs revenue system. They all have trade portals. We're trying to see how to connect these systems. We have supported the development of these systems at a country basis. And now we are looking at regional systems that allow sharing of information. And Canada has actually been very vital in this support. They did support the single customs territory in the East African community, which allowed for the community to have a single tariff implemented through a destination model where your imports are brought to the port and you're able to clear them even before they arrive, simply because all the manifestations and everything is already captured online. And both Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, DRC are able to see these details online and are able to clear your goods as they progress through the different borders. So we're working on connectivity. We believe this is a perfect blueprint for the Continental Free Trade Area, because we've already supported this within the East African region, and we're now expanding it to DRC. We're seeing how to expand to Zambia, Malawi, so that there's a whole digital footprint for movement of goods. And I know people have talked about services, payment systems, and all that. So innovations are critical, connectivity is critical, but a solid regulatory system is very critical in allowing the region to grow. And I just thought, let me take this opportunity to make a shout out to Susan Stefan. We were with her in Busia on the 10th of March, just before the borders closed. We were with her at the fish market. It was an amazing trip, seeing how the trade was bustling, the women and all the trade was bustling. And we're trying to put those traders onto online systems, because they trade their fish all the way from Kenya to the corners of DRC, to the corners of Chad, to the corners of South Sudan, to Zambia, and they're sitting in Busia, which is near the lake in Kenya and Uganda. And so we're with her trying to work out some of those issues around standards, around ICT for trade, digital commerce for such goods. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And a big thank you to each one of you as panelists. We've gone over time slightly, come to the end of our program, but certainly not to the end of the mission and the agenda. So I'd like to provide my email address for those who don't have it, to follow up any requests for connections, outstanding questions. In addition to the email we'll be sending out, please don't hesitate to reach out. It's Gareth, Garreth, @canadaafrica.ca. And details as well on our website, canadaafrica.ca. It is a privilege to engage with so many of you and to deepen the levels of engagement. And finally, I want to thank High Commissioner Sibongiseni Dlamini-Mntambo, who not only embraces her role as a country High Commissioner, but indeed represents the African Union, given South Africa's role as country chair, as was alluded to by President Mzamo. And thank you for the connections that you've made and for your unwavering commitment to increasing the amount of activity in a truly Pan-African manner. And it's my great privilege, before I hand over to you for closing remarks, to also indicate that we have our annual 3-day Africa Accelerating Summit. It's a virtual interactive summit with an in-person component taking place in a few cities across the continent. One of our sponsors has just written to me to say that he'd like to offer, or she'd like to offer on behalf of her team, complimentary access to that to everyone participating on this call. So we'll send that through with those details. But we certainly can have no future in terms of truly inclusive growth that is broad-based without the sorts of discussions and implementation that each one of you have addressed. So it has been my honor on behalf of the board and our entire chamber. And in closing, over to you, High Commissioner. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you so much, Gareth. To our esteemed panelists, thank you so much for such thought-provoking inputs this morning. We really, really do appreciate it. Excellencies, our distinguished guests, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. You know, when thousands of South African women marched to the Union buildings in 1956, August, it was to wage a political war and for recognition. While Women's Day in South Africa has in large part been to celebrate the strength and the resilience of women and their contribution to the society and the country. After 1994, the focus for South African women shifted towards drawing attention to many of the important issues that women in South Africa and indeed in Africa still face. We have now joined other women, not only in Africa, but globally, to wage a war to demand, amongst others, equality, recognition, and economic inclusion. The potential lingering effects of COVID-19 on women and the economy are too much to fathom. The pandemic is threatening to reverse some of the gains on women's issues. It seems to be deepening the pre-existing inequalities, especially when it comes to women. You know, empowering women and including women in the economy is not an act of charity, but it is the right thing to do, because we have observed that when women are empowered to work and create their own businesses, it's not only the immediate families whose quality of life improves, but it is that of the communities within which these women businesses operate. The session today was very crucial, especially for women entrepreneurs in Africa. It is my hope, Gareth, that Canada's partners across Africa will go an extra mile to prioritize women-owned businesses in Africa, to provide the necessary support for their businesses to participate meaningfully in existing and new markets. It is indeed my hope that the women entrepreneurs and their businesses will get the support in terms of investment. According to the information from the UN Women comprise 40% of the global workforce, yet they are 20% less likely to access financial support from financial institutions, thus making women less likely to be entrepreneurs and to start businesses. Without basic financial services, women can't access the funds they need to start or to expand their own businesses or to save their profits securely for the future expenses. Compounded economic impacts of COVID-19 are felt especially by women who are generally earning less, but they have to provide for their families. It is my hope that these companies will look into programs that will support African women-owned businesses to have access and control over productive resources, to accumulate assets, to participate meaningfully in economic decision-making at all levels, from the household to international institutions, and also be in position to influence these institutions to determine growth and development. We need to see more women taking part in the economy, because when more women work, lives change for the better and economies grow. Women economic empowerment boosts productivity, it increases economic diversification and income inequality, in addition to other positive development. Mr. Davis, I have heard so much about Renew strategies. I do hope that very soon we will have time to talk, especially talk about possibilities in the SADC region and other African regions. And I do hope you will connect with Sindi, because the organization that she is leading, it has its footprints in the whole of Africa. So it will be important for you to connect. A lot was covered today. My job really is to say we really appreciate Canada-Africa business partnership, but there is room for more involvement. Africa would like to see more women companies from Africa doing business with Africa. In May this year, it was encouraging to hear from Mr. Wamkele Mene, the first Secretary of the African Continental Free Trade Area, on the plans to include women-owned businesses in the African Continental Free Trade Area. This is the time for the Canada business in Africa to look into what can be done to empower the African women-owned businesses to participate meaningfully in the African Continental Free Trade Area. President of the Africa Chamber of Business, Mr. Gareth Bro, I know the Canada-Africa of Business has a very important meeting in a month, in a few weeks or so. Perhaps this could be part of your agenda. Having said that, I would like to again thank the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business for working tirelessly to put Africa first. And I would like to also thank the panelists for all the presentation this morning. And we are hopeful that there will be improvement in the way that we work between Canada and Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We really appreciate it. And I can confirm on behalf of our board and our chair that that is firmly a part of our agenda at Africa Accelerating. And we're very excited to welcome yourself and everybody else on this call to that very important engagement. And it'll be taking place over 3 days with events in person. That'll be in Johannesburg, Gaborone, Nairobi. So it's going to be a very interactive time for us all together. And so we really look forward to that. We have another event coming up to which each of you are invited on the 26th of August. And there we'll be hearing from business leaders in action on building communities across the continent through investment. One of those speakers is Nasim Lari, MD of Lucara Diamond. She is born and raised in Botswana, where she leads. Lucara is a Canadian company, and again, just an example of the innovation and the leadership that we're seeing that's providing a blueprint all across the continent and indeed across North America. So thank you once again. Thank you, Vice President Susan Namulindwa. This is all a team effort, and if it wasn't for individuals like yourself, none of this would happen. May each of you have a very well-rested day or evening ahead, and we look forward to seeing you, I hope, on the 26th of August, as well as at our 3-day summit. May you have a wonderful rest of the week. Stay safe and see you soon.
Thanks, Greg.